Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Medtech Impact Podcast, where you get to hear from leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of medical technology. I'm Kyle Kruse.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn.
And we're your hosts of the show.
So today on the Medtech Impact Podcast, we're delighted to be joined by Doug Evans, CEO of Lungpacer. Doug, welcome to the show.
And Richard, it's great to be here with you today on your podcast. Thanks for inviting us to talk about Lungpacer.
Well, Doug, I hate to call you an industry veteran, but I look at your track record and it is quite esteemed. You know, the companies you've been at, some big names in the space. I think you have, a patent portfolio for that anyone could be envious of yourself. And clearly you're doing some amazing things with Lungpacer, which we will get into in today's discussion. As we always like to do when we kick things off, we want to know, what is that big problem that Lungpacer is looking to solve?
Well, so to start the story, it's important to know that there's about 2 million patients each year in the United States that require mechanical ventilation. And mechanical ventilation got a lot of attention during the COVID pandemic. And while it's life-saving, it unfortunately also does a lot of harm to patients. And about 40% of the people that require mechanical ventilation, sadly and tragically, pass away. And again, while it provides that necessary breath needed for patients that are in respiratory distress, it also causes harm both to the patient's lungs, their hearts, and their brains. And really, what's most important to tell about the story is that, most of these patients are sedated when they go onto mechanical ventilation to keep them calm and to keep them from fighting against the ventilator. And this sedation keeps a very important muscle, the diaphragm, from contracting. And since the diaphragm muscle is one of the two muscles in our body that's constantly working, when it is rested for just a short period of time, it can lose about 50% of its mass in just a few days when it's rested. And this makes it really difficult for these patients to regain the ability to breathe on their own because their respiratory pump is essentially atrophied. So our mission as a company is to get these patients off of ventilation as fast as possible, and then to prevent some of the injury that's occurring when these patients are on mechanical ventilation.
So you point out like a highly stressful situation where someone's being put onto a device like this, something introduced like any foreign object new to the body, but I think something again that's, we just breathe naturally, we don't think about it, and all of a sudden you've got this machine which is like almost taking over your body. Can you tell us a little bit like more about that process? Like what's the technology being used in the current standard of care?
Sure. So, our approach is to help improve the standard of care. So today, when a patient is in distress, so it could be they have an infection, maybe they have COVID, they've just come out of surgery, maybe they had trauma from a car accident, bike riding accident. These patients all find themselves in need of resting their body and to give them time to heal. And during that time, they may not be capable of breathing for their own. So the mechanical ventilator emerged in the early 1900s, so 1920, 1930s. And the concept there was to really force air into the lungs of patients every couple seconds because they weren't conscious or they weren't able to do it on their own. Now, that's very different than the way that we're breathing right now on this podcast. We don't even have to think about it. And this diaphragm muscle just moves down and out of the way from our lungs. It creates space around our lungs and also a little bit of negative pressure. And our lung tissue just expands into that space. And as that happens, the air from the outside moves into our lungs, and then that muscle relaxes, forcing the air out. And so without any pressure, the air and oxygen and CO2 are exchanged through our lungs. But when the patient's on a ventilator, that muscle stays pushed up against the lungs. So ventilation needs to apply a significant amount of pressure to fill those lungs. And what unfortunately happens is that the regions that are closest to the ventilator in the upper lungs get overexpanded, and the regions of the lungs that are closest to the diaphragm stay compressed. So we don't really get the full volume of the lung to participate in each breath with these patients. And that leads to a series of complications. So that diaphragm muscle, which is rested, atrophies quickly. And because of the way the lungs are filling, they can get a high pressure injury from the overpressure. and a low pressure injury where the lungs aren't participating in breathing. And that standard of care hasn't changed dramatically for many, many years.
Well, it's interesting because that 40% number too, that's pretty alarming. I mean, when you're put on a ventilator, you kind of have this expectation as a patient, especially, like, this is going to save my life. Not, oh, there's a 40% chance that I actually might not make it. And you've made some comments, Doug, about how you're trying to help the standard of care. So I want to talk now a little bit about Lungpacer. Please tell us, how are you trying to help the standard of care? Are you trying to assist it? Do you have a whole new technology? What does that look like?
Well, we're starting out really trying to be complementary to the standard of care and really focus on improving patients' outcomes. So the first thing to know is most of these individuals that require help from mechanical ventilation, they're really in a critical state. This is a period of time in their life where this is, the worst days that they are having. So they're very fragile individuals. So when we approach trying to improve things for them, we had to think really about minimally invasive type of approaches. And, we set about with our goal of really, how do we free them from the ventilator faster? And how can we preserve then ultimately the health of their diaphragm, their lungs, the heart, and even their brain, all of which can take a beating from mechanical ventilation. So our approach was, since the brain can't actively control that breathing muscle because of the sedation, we wanted to find a way to take control of the signaling from the brain down to the diaphragm muscle. And so the way this breathing process works is there are two key nerves that come from the brain down to that muscle. And what we discovered is that there are blood vessels that travel very close to those nerves, and that we could place a neurostimulation array in those blood vessels very close to the nerves and send signals through the vein wall to capture those nerves and actually control the breathing for that patient and actively move that diaphragm muscle. So using a catheter-based platform, which is very comfortable and convenient and well known for clinicians, and we were able to integrate our technology into a platform, again, that they use every day. We're able to give them a tool whereby they can send the signals to the diaphragm muscle and keep it active and help rebuild muscle strength for these patients to get them off the ventilator faster.
Wow. What's really cool too, Doug, is that we've had some amazing technologies on the show. I mean, Richard, think about some of the devices. I mean, neurostimulation in general and how it's providing treatment for patients throughout all different parts of the body, all different challenges. I haven't yet heard about leveraging neurostimulation for, ventilation, for breathing. And Doug, I find this fascinating. So this catheter that you're talking about here, it works with a ventilator, the device. Where does the catheter go inside the body exactly? And how does that work with the ventilator, and how do the electrodes come into contact with the right nerves? How do you figure all that out?
No, great questions. And so many of these patients will have something called a central venous catheter or central venous line in, and that's used to deliver medications and fluids to them, keep them appropriately hydrated. So we know that clinicians are used to using those types of tools. Those devices are frequently placed in the jugular veins or in the subclavian veins. So jugular veins are up in our neck. The subclavian veins are sort of down in our shoulder area here. So we wanted to leverage those 2 points. You access those veins typically with something called the Seldinger technique, where a small needle is used to place a guide wire, a flexible wire, into the blood vessel. And it's essentially like a monorail. And then that's advanced through that blood vessel. And then the catheter, or in our case, our neurostimulation delivery system, is threaded over that wire and then advanced through either the jugular or the subclavian veins down towards the heart in an area called the superior vena cava. And so our tip of our catheter is down in the cavo-atrial junction at the distal part of the superior vena cava, and then the more proximal part is up on the left side of the body. And what's really wonderful is that the engineers were quite clever, And although we're only trying to stimulate two nerves, because one nerve controls the left part of our diaphragm and one nerve controls the right part of our diaphragm, we actually incorporated 30 electrodes into our delivery system. And the reason to do that is so that one device has enough electrodes that it can work in almost every patient. And so we don't have to directly contact the phrenic nerves. We just have to be close enough that we can send some focused energy in the direction of the nerves and capture them so that we can use them then to control the diaphragm muscle. We synchronize the contractions with the breath from the mechanical ventilator. So we place a small little sensor on the ventilator, and when the ventilator is deciding to give the patient a breath, we can detect that, and then we contract the muscle, move the muscle out of the way, and it makes it easier for the lungs to fill appropriately with the air from the ventilator.
Awesome. Well, I think, Richard, we could follow and read between the lines. I mean, Doug used some pretty big words there, but the nice part is it seems like a pretty kind of intuitive technology that kind of just works very nicely alongside with just already the current procedures and what doctors and physicians are already doing. Now, I am curious too, is there some sort of imaging though that's required to make sure that the placement of the catheter is in the vicinity, or is that not even required? Because you did make a comment saying, well, as long as they're, we've got 30 electrodes, as long as it's in the region or whatever, we're good, right? But
Yes. So, first of all, the system provides some guidance to the clinician as they're placing the catheter. So, while we have stimulation electrodes on the catheter, we also use those to gather data. So, our distal electrodes can be used to capture electrocardiogram information. And so we can display that information to the user, and they can use that for visual cues as to when the tip of the catheter is right in the right spot in the patient. And then during typical placement of central venous catheters, it is recommended that an x-ray is taken just to confirm that the catheter tip is in the right spot. So we follow that general practice and we recommend that an x-ray is taken. But with regard to the clinician having to do a lot of manipulation with our catheter to align electrodes, because we have so many electrodes, that's most often not necessary with our device. So the idea was to make it very easy, follow the current standards of care for placing catheters, and then that catheter is sutured in, and the software figures out which of the electrodes are the ones that will be used to stimulate the nerves.
This is incredible, and I love the way, Doug, you're just turning what is obviously clearly a pretty complex piece of equipment and helping us truly understand. I felt like I was swimming through the arteries and the veins with you as you were sort of guiding us anatomically through that process. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about like the impact of this technology. So maybe we're starting with like, some of the numbers around the percentages of people affected and obviously the cost impact of that. And then, of course, what you're seeing when you are introducing your solution.
Absolutely. So, in the United States today, there are about 2 million or more patients who are going to require mechanical ventilation each year. And 38% of those patients will still be on a ventilator at day 5. And the longer they're on a ventilator, the less likely they are to survive and or regain independent breathing. So really over a third of these patients are really in need of help to hopefully get them home faster. So what we have done is we've used our technology two ways. In one fashion, with our AeroPace device, we've focused in on this 38% of those patients, and we are using the device to rebuild their muscle strength and get them off of a ventilator faster. And our recent FDA approval was based upon data that shows us that we can increase the number of patients that get off a ventilator. We can reduce the time they spent on a ventilator, shortening it by 3 days compared to the control group. And really most excitingly, we can reduce the risk of a patient having to go back on a ventilator by 60%, which is extraordinary. So that goes to show that the technology rebuilds strength enough that these patients, when they wean, it's a very durable wean. And this has a lot of impact for the healthcare system because the costs of these 2 million patients each year to the healthcare system, is about $100 billion, which is extraordinary. So if we can find ways to cut days and then also improve outcomes for these patients, it can be not only meaningful for those individuals, but also for the clinicians and the healthcare system.
Amazing. So yeah, meaningful impact for the patients, but also for the bottom line of the providers and the caregivers, that this is something that could really be helpful. You were alluding there that you've obviously done some work to get to this stage, and congrats again on that, the FDA news. That's amazing to get to that milestone. Tell us a little bit more now, like, what about that journey? Like, what have you done through the research and the studies? And again, where are you now in that process?
Sure. So, the journey started out with, obviously doing a large and extensive amount of preclinical work to understand the safety and the biocompatibility of the components for the Lungpacer technology. And then once we are confident in those elements, we moved into early stage clinical studies. After our very first early feasibility study, we met with the FDA, and they felt that this could be a breakthrough technology because they knew very well these 38% of the patients are at high risk for never regaining the ability to breathe independently. So we collaborated with FDA, they granted that designation to us, and we developed a clinical study plan. And then we worked through a series of a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3 study to continue to collect more and more evidence on the way that the AeroPace device can help these patients. And our basic premise of building strength was proven out in our pivotal study, showing that we can improve muscle strength in these patients by about 50%. And then that led to those better weaning outcomes, and then the greater durability of not having to go back on mechanical ventilation at a much higher rate than the other group. So we're excited to have a good partnership over the last couple of years with FDA and a very diligent series of studies to build the data set around that AeroPace technology.
I love, Doctor, how you just talk about this so smoothly, Kyle. This is like just clearly taking a while to get there. There's so much you're packing into, and you're covering here. It's amazing that that again that you've got to this stage, but clearly so much has gone into getting to there.
It's insane because I've been following Lungpacer for years now, and it's just super exciting, being someone that came from the contract manufacturing industry and just following that journey, and watching your technology evolve and watching you bring this to market. And yeah, those clinicals, that was no easy feat, I'm sure. It looked like it was a PMA approval too, right? Was that correct, Doug?
That's correct. So this technology is a PMA.
Yeah.
The trials were quite extensive, and while it might seem like it would be easy to enroll a study on mechanical ventilation during the pandemic, it was actually unfortunately quite challenging. And our healthcare providers and the hospitals and institutions were just so overwhelmed with the influx of patients needing their support that most clinical research was sidelined for about a year and a half before we could restart the studies. So many companies trying to work within that space to help those patients unfortunately weren't able to make as much progress. But we had a great team, great investors, and good board members, and they supported us through that period of time. And we were able to reward everyone with this recent approval for AeroPace, and also keep progress going on our second product, AeroNova.
Nice. Well, again, it's just so exciting this time of like where you've got to that huge milestone. Maybe you could share with the audience what's next. You've got to that huge place. Obviously, there's a lot more to be done now. Like what lies ahead in sort of like next 12 to 18 months?
Sure. So, our core mission and next key things that we want to accomplish are number one, a successful launch of the AeroPace system. And then we want to further develop the AeroNova system behind it, which will help us address the other 60% of the patients who are on mechanical ventilation. And then we're going to be doing a fundraising. So those are our next three big objectives that we want to pursue. And I'm happy to give more detail on any of those as you guys see fit.
Well, I'm curious too, especially now. I mean, your product's ready to go. I mean, are you in this commercialization phase where now you're starting to, ramp up manufacturing and actually get the product into the hands of the physicians?
Absolutely. So we have just recruited our Chief Commercial Officer, Kevin Kearney. He comes from a company that's worked in the critical care space called Ceribell. We're really excited to have Kevin on board to build our commercial organization. And our operations, which are based in the United States, just outside of Philadelphia, we have our manufacturing plant, and our team is working diligently to prepare the initial commercial units so that we can get out there and help these patients.
That's fantastic. And
Wow.
what about the, well, it's funny because I do want to touch on, you said AeroNova?
Yes.
Well, is that like a, will that be a 510K now that you've, proven out the technology, you've gone through this, or do you have another, PMA marathon ahead of you?
Yes. Well, we wish it was, but it will unfortunately require a pre-market approval or a PMA.
Okay.
And I think that, the way to think about the AeroNova is that it's going to ideally expand the market for our AeroPace product. So AeroPace is really a rehabilitative technology which is used to try to recover these patients from things that have happened to them when they were on the ventilator for at least those 4 days. And with AeroNova, we are working to use this technology ideally at the onset of when a patient goes on a ventilator. And they're used just a little bit differently. So the approved AeroPace device, we exercise the patient's muscle twice a day. Think of it like going to the gym and build that strength of that muscle so they're able to have a durable breath, and then they can do that without the help of the ventilator. But on AeroNova, we're contracting the diaphragm muscle with every single breath that comes from the ventilator. And some extraordinary things happen with this investigational device based upon the research we've done to date. And we have seen that the diaphragm, of course, stays strong because it's exercising continually. We also see that the lungs feel better because the diaphragm moves out of the way. Those lower regions of the lungs fill very nicely, and the upper regions of the lungs don't get overstretched anymore. So we see better lung homogeneity and better lung function in these patients. And then there's some other really surprising findings for us is that the hearts in these patients seem to be more efficient at working. So there's less stress on them because the ventilator's not pushing as hard into the lungs and because the diaphragm is actually helping with the circulatory process. And then the other thing that we've seen, which is also remarkable, is that there seems to be an indication that we'll be able to mitigate some of the cognitive injury that happens to these patients. So we're very excited about our experimental AeroNova product, and we'll be taking that into its phase 3 study, its pivotal study, next year.
Wow, incredible. Such rewarding work too. I mean, again, like go that PMA route to be able to develop something that just doesn't exist, a treatment, a new standard of care that just has never existed before. And here you guys are actually developing that, bringing this to market. That's going to make a massive impact. That's what it's all about. It's really special. It's inspiring to hear that story, Doug.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you very much.
I mean, Doug, you said the word remarkable, and that truly sums it up. And I feel like so, you mentioned Kevin there. Welcome aboard, Kevin. How can we help Kevin out? Where can you find him? Who
Yeah.
needs to hear this message? Like again, let's put him on the radar.
Yes, well, we're happy if people reach out to us on LinkedIn and then also at our website. You can find a lot of information on postings that we have. And ideally, we'll be building a team to expand both on the commercial side and our operations side. And we expect to double the size of our business, ideally, building up a commercial team of about 40 people from the 3 that are on board today. And we'll be adding additional roles here in our Philadelphia-based facility to help with expanding the business as well over the next couple of years.
And what about any shows or events?
Well, we will be at critical care shows. We just had 2 presentations at the American Thoracic Society conference. We also presented some exciting data recently at a heart failure conference showing that Lungpacer's AeroNova device can improve cardiac function and cardiac output. And we were also just 3 weeks ago at the International Society for Heart and Lung Transplant, showing how use of the AeroNova device in organ donors can improve the health of lungs and actually doubled the number of lungs that would qualify for transplantation. So yet another exciting way for us to be able to use this exciting technology.
Well, I think, honestly, listening to all this, Doug, and like what you've done to get to this stage, what you have now, and what's coming ahead, I mean, you always think about this shift towards value-based care, and something like this solution is so important for it can play such a critical role in providing this support to patients and also their providers.
Absolutely. And we're working with health economics experts to assess our clinical data and really help us understand and convey those clinical outcomes into health economic benefits, not only for the healthcare system, but for the institutions and the insurers as well. And so that's something that Kevin and his team will be sharing with the hospitals and the institutions as we move forward, so they can really truly understand not only the impact for their patients, but also for their bottom line as they incorporate the AeroPace technology into their institutions.
Fantastic. Well, hot news from everything you've said today, and clearly more in the pipeline. Doug, I can't thank you enough for coming on, and just again, what you're doing for patients, what you're doing to help the healthcare system in general. It's awesome, the mission, and yeah, wishing you well with the future.
Well, thank you very much. And it was great to be able to speak with both of you today. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, another huge thank you to our guest, Doug Evans, CEO of Lungpacer. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Medtech Impact Podcast. I'm Kyle Kruse.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn. Until next time, keep innovating.